Valery Semyonovich sat calmly and relaxed in his armchair, watching television. He had been working as a surgeon in a small district hospital for 4 years. He was allocated a tiny apartment on the second floor of a wooden house, but it had running water and heating. The salary was meager, and prices in the area were high. At the moment, he was resting, truly enjoying himself because it felt like a fairy tale rather than work. The nurses always tried to feed him. Valerie couldn't remember the last time he bought food for himself because the patients, mostly from the villages, felt obligated to thank the surgeon who operated on their appendicitis or removed their ingrown toenails. Instead of money, they gifted him with groceries. Everything was different here compared to the big city, and bribes mainly consisted of natural products and gratitude. Valerie didn't refuse them because the people here were kind and sincere, and it would be deeply hurtful to reject their offerings. Once upon a time, Valery Semyonovich worked at a prestigious clinic in a big city. He was a young and ambitious surgeon, full of hopes for the future. However, as it turned out, that was not enough for a good life. As the chief physician told him when he asked to be fired, people without connections and pedigree are not needed here. All of this happened because Valerie carelessly fell in love with the chief physician's daughter. Though at the time they started dating, he didn't know she was his daughter. He found out after her father came to his house early in the morning and angrily pulled the girl out of his bed. Despite the fact that she was already 25 years old at that time, her father didn't mind. Honestly, Valery Semyonovich couldn't imagine how all of this would end. He thought such situations were a thing of the past back in the 90s and couldn't repeat themselves now. But as soon as he arrived at work, he was immediately summoned by the chief physician and asked to write a resignation letter. Valerie was shocked and didn't understand where this sudden request came from. The chief physician told him, "Write it yourself if you don't want me to find a reason to fire you. Maybe you suspect me of stealing prescription drugs or something else." Valerie looked at the chief physician, took a sheet of paper, and asked, "Well, can I know what this is all about? I don't think I've done anything wrong." The chief physician laughed and replied, "No, of course, who needs someone like you without connections and pedigree? Who are you anyway? Just pass by." Valerie experienced a sudden enlightenment. He confidently stood up and struck the chief physician in the jaw with force, without waiting for him to fall, and walked out of the office. Later, he realized that the chief physicians would never forgive him. Valerie wandered without a job for 2 months, and everyone turned a blind eye. No one wanted to hire him. Even those who previously tried to seduce him and bring him to their side. Therefore, when Valerie was offered a job at a women's prison hospital, he simply had no choice. The 3 years he spent there, he would never forget. Valerie had seen and heard many things in his life, but when he encountered the reality of prison, he was simply stunned. Women were the most vicious creatures on earth. It was unclear how they behaved in prison. They constantly fought, engaged in dark dealings, beat each other in groups. And amidst all of this, they managed to get pregnant, poison themselves, and cut themselves. Valerie had many patients, but he would never forget one of the first ones. She was brought in after a fight, severely wounded. While she was unconscious, he said to the nurse, who was also an inmate, "If I had met her in ordinary life, I would have thought she was an angel. What's wrong with them?" and the nurse just smirked and said, "Beware of God, that's Sonia, a bitch." She gave her child to an orphanage and then married some rich guy. He put everything in her name, and she killed him. And now she's the one who starts all the fights, bumps heads with people, and then happily watches them rot in prison. Everyone here already knows to be cautious around Sonia. Valerie was in complete shock. He spent the whole night by Sonia's side because one of her wounds concerned him greatly. He thought that if she survived, she would always have to wear concealing clothing. But of course, that was only if she found the money for plastic surgery. In the morning, she was taken to the central hospital. A convoy accompanied her, and unlike before, when 2 people escorted the patients, this time there were 4. Valerie just shook his head. Here's a delicate creature, he thought, and settled back comfortably. Today was his duty shift. Not much happened usually. Law-abiding citizens usually waited until morning and then called for an ambulance. He thought he might have dozed off a bit, but an annoying siren sound woke him up. Valerie stood up and looked out the window. An ambulance had rushed into the hospital yard. Something serious must have happened. However, since the maternity ward was on the ground floor, he sat back down, assuming someone must be in labor. But if his assistance were needed, they would call for him. He chuckled to himself. Yes, a calm and measured life relaxes a person. I just need to get married, then grow a belly, buy a used foreign car. Wait, I already have a car, and it's quite good. I bought it when I first started working in the big city. Quick footsteps could be heard down the corridor. They were getting closer, which meant they were coming for him. The door swung open. Valery Semyonovich, hurry. It was a man. They brought someone from a car accident. It's bad. Lenavka widened her eyes. She had only graduated from medical school 3 months ago, so her eyes widened frequently. They say the car was really fancy. If it had been a little simpler, the guy would have been dead. But you can tell just by looking at him. He's wearing boots worth 3 of my paychecks. And he has a Perseus ring. Lenoka got to the point. Oh, Valery Semyonovich. The paramedic said he's a VIP. Valerie rushed to the observation room. There was already a doctor from the maternity ward and 2 more nurses. After a quick examination, the doctor commanded, "Prepare the operating room and the patient." His colleague asked him, "Valor, are you sure? It's one thing if he dies before, but if he dies on the operating table, are you suggesting we leave him?" The operation lasted 4 hours. Everyone in the hospital helped Valerie. Only 2 nurses remained at their posts. When they exited the operating room, the doctor who had suggested caution approached Valerie and said, "I don't understand what the hell you're doing here. You should be in a real hospital." Valerie smiled, but as you can see, his colleague came in handy. He shook his head, then extended his hand and took off his hat. "I've never seen anything like this before, and I've been in medicine for years," he said. Valery Semyonovich hardly left the patient's side for 2 days, and when the patient regained consciousness and took a breath, he said, "Now I can finally get some sleep." He returned to the hospital after a day and immediately widened his eyes. "Lenashka, what's happening here?" he asked. The nurses rushed to tell him that the man he had reconstructed piece by piece asked for a phone and made a call somewhere. "Oh, Valery Semyonovich, things have escalated here. So many people showed up, security, doctors from the capital. They're all in the room at once, new furniture and equipment. The chief physician looks pale. They say this guy is some kind of real oligarch. Unbelievable. They asked for you as soon as you can. It's the chief's order. All right, let me change my clothes. Valery Semyonovich approached the ward. The guard glanced at his badge and immediately opened the door. Valera shook his head, feeling like the president. I swear, hello, how are you feeling? He said, addressing the patient. The patient looked at him and smiled. You, I assume, are the doctor who brought me back from the dead. But don't exaggerate. If it were your time to go, no one could have brought you back. So you were destined to live, and my gratitude is not that great. The patient said. Oh no, I've heard stories about you being a wizard. Thank you, I still have too many plans, so I owe you, stop it. Valerie replied, it's just my job. While Valerie examined the stitches and read the test results, the man spoke softly. If everyone did their job as well as you do, there wouldn't be any problems on the side. Here I am, the president of a huge company. You know how much money I have. I don't even know. I pay so much money to everyone around me, and yet at any moment, a wheel can fall off while I'm driving. How do people not understand that I will hold them accountable for it? Because they always hope. Maybe it will be fine. Maybe it won't fall off. Maybe I'll survive or maybe die. But it's definitely too early for you to die. He looked up. The patient was about 45, maybe a bit older. Perceptive eyes, a slight smirk, and that's despite the pain he was feeling now, which simply couldn't be absent. But if you say so, then let's live, the patient replied. By the way, my name is Arkady Andreevich, but for you, it's just Arkady, and I'm Valery Semyonovich. As you understand, in our fully state-funded hospital, we don't have half of the medications that you need, doctor. That's not even a question. He waved his hand, and immediately a man appeared next to him whom Valerie hadn't noticed before. The man was wearing a white coat, which made Valerie conclude that he must be the capital doctor. He had a hefty briefcase. He reached out his hand and said, Georgie, take a look. I think I have everything necessary. I made a plan, but Arkady Andreevich refuses to be treated with these medications without your approval. Arkady was supposed to be transferred to the capital in 3 weeks. He sat on the bed, able to stand up, but only for about 5 minutes. Valerie, I called as soon as I found out something. They somehow got close to this patient, despite their money. Arkady turned out to be a real guy. I'll be grateful. There are wonderful people here, but I want to do real work. I won't forget. And in general, I hope we won't lose each other, Arkady said. Arkady didn't deceive. A month later, Valery said his goodbyes to everyone and headed towards Moscow, where a promising position awaited him. He was on the phone with the chief doctor, who said, The pay is good here, and we work diligently. People from all over Russia come to us. So be prepared to utilize all your knowledge. Valery was ready. This was exactly what he wanted. Half a year passed. Valery managed to meet with Arkady only twice. The first time, they simply took a walk and talked since Arkady was still on medication. But the second time, they had a proper celebration, drank, and had a heartfelt conversation. One evening, Valery received a phone call. He smiled because the melody was the same one they chose together when they were depleting their supplies at the bar. Every time Arkady called, Valery felt like laughing because it was the flight of the bumblebee playing. Neither of them could remember why they chose that tune, but they stuck with it. Valera, my friend, hello. So if you're calling, something happened? Arcady said, laughing. I'm in love. Well, almost in love. There are, of course, some complications, but I'm getting married. Despite his age, Arcady had never been married, and he had no children. He was deeply concerned about this matter and even contemplated asking. Well, it could have been different, but Katerina is pregnant. Do you know what that means to me? But congratulations to you. So the wedding is in a month. You're an honored guest. I'll send you the invitation. Valerie witnessed an extraordinary gathering of wealthy people. He only briefly encountered Arcady, who assured him that he would introduce him to his bride before the wedding. Valor, your opinion is important to me, so pay attention. Is everything okay? Is anything wrong? She's silent. All right, go already, Arcady said. About 20 minutes later, Arcady approached Valerie. Please welcome my Katanka, he said. Before Valerie stood a delicate creature. Despite being over 30, she looked stunning. Like an angel, and then Valerie felt a sudden shock. He handed a glass to someone and took a step towards the bride. He quickly grabbed her hand and pulled down the collar of her dress. The woman screamed. Arcady was indignant. What do you think you're doing? Underneath the collar was a scar, a noticeable and unattractive one. It was evident that someone had already tried to fix it, but it was still quite prominent. Arcady, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you, but your bride's name isn't Katerina, it's Sophia. The woman looked at him with horror-filled eyes and stepped back, only to be stopped by security. The most interesting part, she can never have children, never at all. After the knife attack, she served time in prison, where she served a sentence for the same wealthy husband that you were going to become. Arcady sat down next to Valerie on the restaurant step. Valerie turned to him and said, How are you? Well, all right. It's disappointing that I fell in love with a child that doesn't exist. Thanks, Valor. I don't know how I became such a fool. I always tested everyone, and then... Yes, it's nothing. I spoiled your celebration. Shall we go have a drink? The tables are still set. Let's go. Arcady waved his hand, hugged his friend, and said, But I'm still getting married. I'll go to the city where you used to work, and I'll marry Lenashka. She always had those dreamy eyes, and she will give me 3 sons and a lovely daughter. Valerie laughed. 4 sons, no problem. The important thing is that she gives birth. If you enjoyed the story, I hope you'll show your support by clicking the thumbs up button.